Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear participants, friends, and all those who are watching or listening today. Today, we are back with another session for Islam and youth. The questions and the issues which might bother our young adults. And the purpose, as I have been telling all along, is to engage all of you in a meaningful and a healthy dialogue and a debate. I would like to present my own view, which might be an alternative view to the issues that we're going to discuss or we discuss each time. And it's not necessary at all to be convinced by the view or to accept it. The primary reason is just to present another view with its arguments so that you are able to understand a different approach. And that approach could be something that might tickle you or might induce you to find out more about that issue. So as long as you become more interested in finding out in more detail about what exactly would be the right answer to a particular question, then that would be sufficient. So remember, in a friendly exchange, in a dialogue, the purpose is always to discuss and debate. This is not a dogmatic exchange. This is not meant to be a forceful exchange. It's just meant to present before you some alternative reasoning. And as I said, the purpose is so that you are able to come together and thrash out these issues. One important thing is that if these issues or some of the other ones that might come to your mind, if they ever bother you, don't lull them to sleep. I mean, one of the attitudes that we might adopt is that we just turn a deaf ear to them, or we just ignore them. I think that is something that that precisely is what I would not like us to do. And one of the primary reasons of these sessions is that voices which arise from within ourselves regarding issues, regarding questions or objections, they should always be discussed and debated, because many a time what happens is that we are aware of a wrong understanding of a particular religious directive, and other times we have scanty information. So, I mean, in both cases, it is essential that we do have this discussion as much as is possible. The topics that we are going to discuss today, let me just share them to you before you on the screen. So, these are the three topics that we are going to discuss today. So the first of them is honor killings. I mean, something you'll find being abundantly discussed in third world countries, especially countries like Pakistan, in which we have this dismal and this heinous practice going on, in which fathers or brothers, they end up killing their sisters or daughters in the name of honor. And one of the primary reasons for this is that they think that if they have eloped with someone or they have married someone without their permission, then this will create a great stigma, or would be a great anathema for them. So they avenge this by killing those souls, and this is such a barbarous act that, I mean, it's just difficult to even digest it. The second issue that we're going to discuss today is the issue of wife beating. And there's this Quranic verse which is mentioned clearly in the Quran, and which does allow a husband to punish his wife and beat her, even though it's a light beating. But again, the question is that what exactly is the background? Is it really something which the Quran has said? Is it an obligation? What are the circumstances? Or is it a pure misunderstanding? So this would be discussed. And finally, we'll discuss another issue, and that is, are women inferior in intellect? Because again, we have this persistent notion, a very strong notion, that women are, they are less in intellect, or their intellect does not match the intellect of men. A number of arguments are proffered. For example, all prophets of God have been men. Mostly people in prominent positions in history have been men. Discoveries and inventions mostly have been made by men. So starting from these secular arguments, we do have religious arguments as well, because there is a hadith also of the Prophet which is quoted and cited, in which it is said that women seemingly are deficient in intellect. So we have a text of the Prophet as well. So this actually creates this notion that we need to have a very important, I mean, we have to have a very serious understanding. If the Prophet himself has said this, then this could be either something that we again might have misunderstood in the background of Arab culture, or is it something which is found in every woman, or is it something which should be, of course, it has become part of our culture, and when I say a part of our culture, I would say the culture of the third world countries, in which men often use this narrative to uh, to to let their wives or daughters know that they don't have sufficient intellect or mental prowess to argue against them. And of course, this again is something which is drawn from religious sources. So these are the three topics that we are going to discuss today. And starting off with the very first one, which is the issue of honor killings. Now, as far as the issue of honor killings is concerned, a couple of things that have to be uh, mentioned, and also, I would say, explained at the very outset. First of them is that as far as marriage is concerned, it comes into, I mean, the marriage contract happens with the consent of the would be husband and wife. If permission is not sought from the parents for any reason, this is something which does not invalidate a marriage or make them ineligible to enter into a marriage contract. So, therefore, first of all, this notion has to be got rid of, that marriage has to be, in all circumstances, conducted or taken place with the consent of the parents. And this is something which has been left to the discretion of the would-be husband and wife. Of course, parents, in all their sincerity, in all good faith, for example, they would be having concerns in certain issues. They do have the right to present these concerns. They do have the right to even let their children know that how disastrous, if in their opinion, this marriage is going to be. But that is all that they can do. That is all as far as they can go. After that, if the boy or the girl still insist and they still think that this is their right to marry one another out of their own consent, then religion has also given them this right. The Almighty has given this right to every couple who, out of their own will, without any coercion, without any external force, they have the will, they have this freedom to exercise this judgment that they have made. They can take this decision on their own. So the parents have to honor their decision. The parents must realize that even if their decision that has been taken could prove disastrous, even then they must realize that this is a choice which God has given to every adult child, every young mind, every person who is able to take a decision. So they have no right to forcefully stop them. There is a narrative of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is also cited in this regard, which says, "La nikaha illa bi wali," and it is often translated as, "Unless the guardian permits it, there is no nikah, there is no marriage." Now, if we study the Quran, we'll find that the conditions which are which are found in the Quran do not mention any such restriction. So they have to be this restriction has to be interpreted in the larger context. The things that the Quran mention is that women or men who enter into a marriage contract, they have to be chaste, they have to be pure, and they must not be indicted by the court in any way for adultery. And meher has to be given to the wife, and it has to be through free consent, and marriage has to be declared openly. So these are the conditions which the Quran refers to, and we also find them in the established Sunnah of the Prophet. If we are able to understand this much, then the fact that since marriage is a social contract, since in marriage generally it is men, I mean, it's not the husband and the wife who enter into a contract. It's essentially a marriage between two families, and it is like the fact that the extended families also have a role to play. So in such cases, the Prophet has advised that in normal circumstances, marriages should take place with the consent of the guardians, because this is how things generally work. Because when you create a family, that family is meant to produce, I mean, amongst other things, the next generations. And for the development of those next generations, you need the help of the extended family. So in all in the fitness of things, generally the consent of the family has to be there, so that in future the child which is born receives this support from the extended families. But it does not mean in any way that this is a restriction or this is a condition. You see, we need to understand a hadith, we need to understand a narrative in the light of the Quran, and the way we translate it has to be under the context of the Quran. So, la nikaha illa bi wali will not mean that no nikah or no marriage shall take place without the consent of the guardian or the parents. It would mean that it should not generally take place. This is the proper translation if we keep the context of the Quran. So in a nutshell, we can say the consent of the two who are marrying has to be given the foremost authority. It is by not understanding this that parents not only at times create hurdles, but at times they go as far as to, I mean, stop the marriage. One extreme form is this honor killings, in which it's not just the consent which these tribal elders think that they must be sought of, but at the same time they think that if a girl marries outside their own tribe or outside their own family, it will bring shame or disrespect to the family. So this element is also added. So this is such a heinous practice, I would say, that in no circumstances can this ever be even thought of. This is murder, as simple as that, and it is murder which is committed not by some unrelated individuals. It is committed by the guardians of the girl. Such is the heinous nature, such is the extent of this barbarity, that it's not some stranger who has come and committed that murder. It is the family itself. So the second thing that needs to be realized here is that a life cannot be taken. The Quran is explicit here. It says a life cannot be taken until and unless it is for two reasons, and that is either the person whose life is being taken has committed murder himself or herself, or has entered into anarchy against the state or challenged the law of the state. So, which in the Quranic terms is called fasad fil ard, which means spreading anarchy in the state, or challenging the law, in simple words. So if this is not the case, then no case can be brought against killing anyone. And the second stipulation in this regard is that if ever one of these two conditions is satisfied, then also this execution has to be carried out by the state authorities. No single person, no individual has the authority to execute any person. I mean, first of all, we have to understand that conducting a marriage out of one's own will does not in any way warrant such an extreme action. In the second case, we have to understand that as far as the punishment of execution is concerned, that too can only be given in these two circumstances, in these two situations. One, that someone has killed someone, and the other is that he or she is guilty of spreading disorder in the country. So, and the third thing that we have to understand in this regard is that all these executions, whenever they are warranted in these two conditions, they can only be carried out by state authorities. No individual has this prerogative or this privilege in any way. I would also like to narrate to you an incident in the times of the Prophet, which tells us how much the Prophet recommended to stick to the rule of law. He wanted every single individual in this regard, that even if you think that your honor has been violated in any way, if you think there is something like that, even then there's absolutely nothing that you should do. So it is narrated that once a companion of the Prophet, he came to him and narrated a hypothetical situation. He said, "O Prophet, what if I find my wife in a compromising situation? What if I find my wife in a compromising situation with some other man. Should I not kill him?" The Prophet remained silent. He again asked the question. Once again, the Prophet remained silent. The third time he asked this question, the Prophet became red with anger and he said that I'm more honorable than you and God is more honorable than me. The law has to take its course. So how important it is that even in cases where you can see right before your eyes, the most I mean, one of the incidents that can draw and invoke a lot of anger, if you see, is that you see your own wife right before your eyes with another man in a compromising situation or in a compromising position. And even then, the Prophet said that even if this is the case, that your wife is committing adultery in front of you or is guilty of such lustful acts in front of you, you just cannot take her life. The law has to take its course. You have to report this to the authorities. A proper case has to be instituted. And then we have to understand that as far as this is concerned, you have to proceed through the law. It just cannot be through your own self. And in the first place, there is another directive which Prophet has said, and that is that if this is a deviation, a one-off deviation by your wife maybe, or even by your husband, and then it is better not to even to report it. It's better to cover it. It's better to hide it, because this is going to dent the reputation forever of that chaste lady, because you see, such things do happen as one-off incidents. So such is the sensitivity which we can see from the Prophet, that he always wanted people to follow the law. He always wanted them that they should not take the law in their hands. And in this particular case, as I said, it is a double offense. People who are meant to protect their children or their sisters, they end up killing them. This cannot be imagined. This is a practice that can never be condoned. And in the background of that practice, as I just explained, we have to realize that the consent of the would-be husband and wife is sufficient. If parents have a different opinion, they can advise their children, they can suggest to them, but in no way can they force them. In no way, because this is a right which God Almighty has given them. So I will end my first session here with these words. And if you have any question on this issue, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our first question is asking the number of these hadiths. Can you provide those?
The number of which ones?
The hadiths. The hadith that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think I do have them on my slide. Just let me check, because yes, I have them.
Okay, so the slides will be posted on the WhatsApp group as soon as the session ends.
Right.
So our first question, Akram Bhatti, please go ahead.
अस्सलाम सर।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम।
सर ये जो अभी अपने बात की, इसका मुझे एक वाकया याद है, बहुत मुख्तसर बताता हूँ कि एक लेडी और एक मैन वो एलोप कर गए, they ran away with each other, and later the people found that they were dating or seeing each other before. So some people, their family member tried to kill them, but then the जो पंचायत गांव में होती है, they got together and they said no. Quran says that वो है ना जो खबीस उसके तहत he must marry the same man. She deserves him or he deserves her. So that's the only way they can be forgiven. तो उनकी शादी करवा दी. तो लेकिन वो मैंने मेरे गांधी साहब से सुना कि साजिद साहब से कि वो तो जन्नत दोज़ख की बात की बात है कि बाद में जो अपने यौमुद्दीन के बारे में बात है कि खबीस विल बी खबीसों के लिए, और तो वो क्या अगर सही रिजल्ट है, कई गांव में लोगों को पता नहीं होता, तो ऐसे करते हैं कि या इसको जान बख्शी हो सकती है if he marry the same person.
ये तो उन्होंने बड़ा कर्म किया कि जान बख्शी की बात कर दी, वरना आमतौर से पंचायतें इस तक भी नहीं पहुंचती हैं और वो दोनों को या तो मार देती हैं या उसके बदले में वो किसी और को मारने की सोचती हैं। तो ये बात तो बड़ी उन्होंने नवाजिश की कि थोड़ा इतनी रियायत की। अल खबीसात वल खबीसीन या तय्यबात व तय्यबीन, तो ये बिल्कुल ऐसे ही है, जिसको अगर आप कॉन्टेक्स्ट में पढ़ेंगे, उसमें आखिर में जो आयत का हिस्सा है वो ये बता रहा है कि उनके लिए ये सवाब होगा या ये अजाब होगा, जिससे बिल्कुल वाज़ेह है कि वो सवाब और अजाब का ताल्लुक तो चूंकि दुनिया में से है ही नहीं, उसका ताल्लुक तो आखिरत से है। तो इस वजह से इन आयतों का ताल्लुक भी दुनिया से नहीं है। ये बताया जा रहा है कि आखिरत में अल्लाह ताला जो हैं वो बुरे लोगों के साथ रखेंगे और अच्छे लोगों को अच्छे के साथ, और ये इंजाम उनका होगा। इसलिए ये बिल्कुल आपने सही फरमाया, आयत का तो ताल्लुक नहीं है। और
but
लेकिन
they let them live their lives.
हाँ,
They had
ये
kids
बड़ी
and
बात है।
yeah.
यानी जहाँ पे इतना भी हो जाए कि जी चलो उन्होंने अगर आपस में बगैर इजाजत के, यानी उनकी इजाजत की शादी की है, और एंड दे आर एबल टू इवन चले फिर लिव देयर लाइव्स टुगेदर, तो दिस इज समथिंग व्हिच इज स्टिल, यानी अगर उन्होंने वाकई शादी की है और एडल्ट्री नहीं की, तो फिर तो ये बिल्कुल बिल्कुल ठीक उन्होंने किया। मतलब ठीक से क्या मुराद है, ये तो हर हाल में होना चाहिए, इसलिए कि उनको राइट ही नहीं है किसी को रोकना। दे जस्ट कैन नॉट स्टॉप एनीवन फ्रॉम मैरिंग। देखिए, जो द अंडरलाइंग थिंग दैट आई एम ट्राइंग टू स्ट्रेस हियर for all those who might be listening and for the young minds as well, and that is that parents have no right to stop their children in any way in taking any major decision of their life, including spouse selection, including career selection, including whatever they have in mind. Of course, they have to be respectful to their to their parents when they decide something which is against their wishes. This is a given. But on the other hand, what parents need to realize is that they are in a position of suggestion. They can recommend to their children, but they cannot stop them in any way. Even if they think that they're doing something extremely wrong, which might be disastrous, even then they have to just advise them. They can just tell them as much as they like. But if finally the children still decide that they have to get married with each other, then they cannot stop them. So this is the bottom line. This is the mindset that I would like ourselves to change, because in most Muslim societies, parental consent, in fact, is considered to be the final. Although we do find a change here in a lot of countries happening, and at the same time, children not even asking their parents at times simply because they know that they'll force them not to do so. So I think it is a matter of great and grave concern at the same time that all of us as parents, we have to realize that it is our responsibility to groom our children as they are growing up. But once they become adults, they cannot be. This is a right which God has given them. This is the right that all of us have from the Almighty to take any major decision in our lives. So I would actually go one step further and say that parents who stop their children from marrying when they are in the age that they can decide themselves, they are committing a violation of human rights. So stopping their children from marrying when they have been given this right by God is actually going against God. And I would classify it as a violation of human rights. And they have to realize this. And another thing that they need to realize is that if they start doing, if they keep adhering to this behavior, as is the case in many countries, they'll start losing their children, as is the case which is happening because of this unwarranted force which is applied upon their children. The children, they could initially listen to their parents, but what is now happening is this rebellious attitude which we see from springing up from our children, so just because they think that they are not being given their own rights.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We have a question that asks, is the ruling of Quran about the choice of marriage just when two Muslims, like a Muslim man or a Muslim woman are getting married to each other? Or does this case also apply in case of a Muslim partner and a non-Muslim partner?
So as far as a Muslim partner and non-Muslim partner is concerned, before I answer that, the important thing which the Quran stresses is that the marriage between the two people, if they profess themselves to be God-fearing individuals, has to be between monotheists, people who believe in the creed of monotheism, who are very strict monotheists, who believe in one God, because the Almighty wants any association which comes into being through marriage based on this belief that both partners believe in monotheism, so that the children that they raise up also are strong monotheists. So that is why the Quran urges that even amongst Muslims, there are so many deviants who might not be very strict regarding the creed of monotheism. So even when you're marrying amongst Muslims, just forget about non-believers, even then, one of the criteria for selections, of course, other criteria are there, that you are compatible and you should have some sort of similarity. But even before that, faith is a very important criteria, and that is that you have to be strong monotheists. And if this is not the case, even amongst Muslims, even that marriage is not recommended. So if you're marrying with a non-believer, with a non-Muslim, then again you have to see that whether the person that you're marrying is a monotheist or not. And in this regard, the step which is taken by the Quran is that even in cases of marriage outside faith, it stresses that only Muslim men should marry Muslim women, who are not believers, and that too, that those Muslim women should be chaste, they should be modest, I mean, in their character, and at the same time, they have to be strong monotheists, believe in one God. Christians, for example, they are very strong monotheists. Jews, of course, there's no question about them as well. So it has taken a step down and allowed marriage between a Muslim man and a believing non-Muslim woman if she is a monotheist. So, for example, outside Christian faith or Jewish faith, if we think there are faiths in which the person who is one gets to married with, or the woman wants to get married with, is not a monotheist, then this is not encouraged. So this is how I would answer it. That yes, the consent is something which is always there, but besides the consent, the condition for marriage outside faith is that monotheism has to be taken into account.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, what age does the Quran define as adults? And when can people start making their own choices?
The Quran does not give any age, but it tells us that it has to be a decision amongst the people, because it has to be out of their free will. This age can vary from society to society, from culture to culture, from era to era. As long as the person who is taking this decision knows right and wrong, knows, he or she is mentally mature enough to know what life is about, what marriage exactly is all about, and what are the responsibilities that it will entail. So it's basically that mental maturity, and that mental maturity varies from, as I said, from society to society, from country to country, from culture to culture, and even a law can be made that this certain age can be regarded as a mature age. So countries can have different laws, but the principle is the same, that it has to be a mentally mature age. So keeping this principle in mind, legislation can be made in a country in which a certain age can be fixed, or if that legislation is not made, then it has to be left to the discretion of the people who are marrying, with this guidance that they must not be forced. Of course, at the same time, just as they should not be forced, they cannot be in any way be underage as well. So you see, what parents do is at times twofold. They are not just forcing their mature children, but by not taking the consent of very young children, like for example, at the age of 8 or 9 or 7, when a child is not even aware of the details of marriage, they fix this marriage, or they actually give their word to the other party that, okay, I'll marry my child to such and such a person as they grow up. In such cases, the Prophet, we have a very famous incident in his times, that one of the fathers and the mothers, they did this. They in their childhood, they made this decision that they'll have them married to each other as they grow up. So when this happened, when the Prophet asked them that, would you like to marry that person? Would you like to honor the decision of your father and mother? It is your choice as you have grown up. If you think that your father and mother have taken the right decision, okay, you can honor it. But if you think that you'd not like to marry the proposed person, you can just reject it. So you see, such is the nature of this freedom which has been given to us.
Thank you. The next question asks that the Quran has proclaimed that a noble man is for a noble woman, and vice versa. Can you please explain in what Quran regards as noble?
Well, it doesn't give any details. The word used by the Quran is at-tayyibatu lit-tayyibin, which means people who are pure, people who are not contaminated with sins, people who would end up in paradise, you can say, because the verse is not related to this world at all. It is a verse which relates to the hereafter. So obviously, it would mean that people who end up in paradise would be the people who are pure, people who are noble, and people who would end up in hell would be the khabith or the ignoble. So the choice is that once you end up in paradise, you are classified as a person who has, who deserves to be married to a partner of his or her own choice. So it's as I said, the verse is related to the hereafter, and in the hereafter, because the groupings will be on the basis of one's deeds. So all those who end up in hell, uh, they will be partners to one another, and all those who will end up in heaven, they'll be, of course, regarded as pure and noble.
Thank you. Does the Quran say anything about marrying cousins, if that's a good thing or not? And if so, why?
It does not say anything. It gives us the choice. You see, there are a lot of things which are left to human intellect as well. Because if there is some problem being created by a decision or by a choice that has been given by the Almighty to human beings in any way, then laws are precisely for this reason to be made. So you see, one of the bases on the grounds of which you can do legislation is to stop any disorder or anything which is inappropriate to be happening. So if there are societies in which cousin marriages are producing these problems, as we can see, then of course any law can be made, as is the case in many countries, that laws are made that cousin marriages are prohibited because the children suffer as a result. And we'd also need to remember, when this world started off, this urban culture has just developed in the last couple of centuries. So for many centuries, people were living in tribes, and tribal culture, of course, is heavily dependent on intermarriages between the tribes, between close relations. And this could never have happened unless this urban culture that we are speaking of today was born. So remember, the Quran is for all times. So it doesn't give directives which restrict the development of humanity, or doesn't take into account the current state of humanity. In the times in which the Quran was revealed, there was no such urban culture. There was all tribal culture. We had brotherhoods and tribes in which intermarriages used to take place, and they were just in vogue. So it is only in these last couple of centuries that we have this urban culture in which marriage outside one's family, outside one's tribe, has become the norm. It was considered a sin, in so to speak, in previous cultures. So, since the Quran is for all times, it doesn't give any such directive. It leaves such directives to the culture and the situation that we are living in. And it tells us to exercise our common sense and, of course, this ability that we need to protect human life as much. So, today, if any such law is made in countries to protect future generations from any such bother or deformity, it would be exactly in line with the Quran.
Okay. So, what is the relationship called when a Muslim woman either marries a Christian or a Hindu man? And what should people around them do, and how are they supposed to respond to that?
When they do marry, I mean, still be a marriage. It will not be a illegal marriage. It will be a legal marriage, but it will be a marriage which is taken place in disobedience to the Almighty. At the same time, you see, you have to understand that, I mean, who is the advice being given to? Is it to the couple who are getting married? So if they don't have any, they don't give any importance to faith considerations, why should the parents force this decision on them? I mean, if they have not asked God in the first place, so if they have not asked God, okay, it's their own decision, let it happen. And if the advice is being given to the parents, then again you have to realize that as parents, they are best advised to suggest to their children that this is something which has not been recommended by God. But what if the children are, I mean, they don't give any importance to a lot of other things. For example, if they're not praying or reading the Quran, and suddenly you press upon them that, well, whatever you do, at least don't marry outside your faith, because this is what the Quran says. But I think we have to be consistent. So if the children or the people who are getting married, they are not giving any importance to religion in other aspects of life. For example, as I said, the most fundamental thing is the prayer in our practice, and the institution of Tawheed, which is related to our beliefs. If that is not the case, then it's a choice that they are making, and I think the parents should just accept that choice and just let them know that this is the thing that they are. Just as if they are not praying, they are being disobedient to God. But this doesn't mean that they walk outside the the tenet, or I would say, or the ambit of Islam, there'll still be Muslims, or there will be just Muslims who are not following Islam properly or not practicing. Similarly, if they are marrying outside their faith, they still remain Muslims and the marriage would still be legal, but it would be in disobedience to God. So this is what they need to explain and let the children decide.
So the question here is, if you're letting such people marry, wouldn't you kind of be promoting that ongoing in the society?
I've just explained that. You see, it is not a question of promotion or not promoting them. You don't have the right.
Mhm.
You see, the right the parents have is to advise. They can suggest. So if they are trying to forcibly stop them, and they are committing a felony in the first place. This is something that they are not allowed to do. So if children are doing something, it's not that they are promoting something, or the parents are guilty of some promotion, because in the first place the parents didn't have this authority. Promotion would have taken place or thought to be have done if the parents had this authority and still they were not doing it. In the first place, they don't have this authority. They are just they can only suggest. As I said, they can express their concern. But if still the children would like to pursue or continue with the choice that they have made, it is a right which God has given them. I mean, this is happening all over the world. Just open our eyes and see that we have been given or been sent in this world with our own freedom of will that we need to exercise, and each person is responsible for his or her own actions. As far as parents are concerned, they were responsible for their children when they were growing up in a growing age. Once they are grown up individuals, they become responsible for themselves. This is the scheme of God. So if we are trying to stop it or in any way hamper it, we would be disrupting the scheme of God, which would not be correct, I would say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We'll take one more question and then move over to the next topic because otherwise we'll run short on time. Abdurrahman, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, I previously asked the question of the Surah Nur, ayat number 6, that in which Allah Ta'ala said that, and those who accuse their wives of adultery but have no witness except themselves, the accuser must testify, swearing 4 times by Allah that he is telling the truth. Sir, can you please explain the verse?
What explanation would you need? I mean, it's as simple as that. If you're accusing your wife of adultery and you have no other witness, then the Almighty says that this whole affair will be settled through oaths. So the husband will swear those oaths, and if the wife in reply also swears oaths that she was not guilty, then the matter will be resolved and the two shall be just separated, and nothing will happen. However, if the wife does not refute the husband's testimony, which he has given through those oaths, then the punishment of adultery will be implemented on her.
Sir, is there any capital punishment?
No, there is no such capital punishment. The punishment of adultery is 100 lashes, and that is all.
Thank you. Dr. Saleem, we can move over to the next topic now.
Okay. So the next topic is also a very sensitive topic, if not one of the most sensitive topics, which is often discussed. And I must confess that personally, I was also, I mean, for a very long time, I could not very much understand the prerogative given to husbands regarding beating their wives. And I've always thought that if such is the situation that you have to punish your wife through your own hands, then isn't it better to just divorce her, or I mean, just have a amicable separation? Because what will happen is that once you beat your wife, she's not going to stay with you any longer, and divorce is bound to happen. So if it is bound to happen after beating her, why not have it before? So I must confess, for a very long time, I always had my reservations on this Quranic directive. But after a long thought and a long deliberation, I do think that this is a very, very important area. And I think the point that the Quran is making has a very specific context, and I think it is something that has to be understood in its background. And because we today are people living in urban cultures, you see, what happens is that, as I just said, that a marriage between cousins is something which is which is a norm, which was a norm in tribal culture, and today in urban cultures this is not a norm at all, and people prefer marrying outside. And in fact, as I said, medical reasons make us even induce us that we should marry outside. So you see, one thing that we need to understand regarding studying the Quran is that it is a book which is for all times and for all cultures. So when it gives directives, it gives them to cover all situations. And the other thing is that when it gives these directives, we have to choose and see whether those directives are mandatory ones or they are choices that are given in certain situations. This is the background, and this is, I think, if you understand this one thing, that urban culture and rural culture, similarly, the choices that we are given regarding following certain directives, are they mandatory choices, or they are choices that need to be invoked with common sense, experience, and in a certain background? So before I explain those verses, just let me explain this part, that in tribal cultures, wife beating was actually something which at times, if conducted in the proper context and background, which I'll just explain, would stop the family from breaking. This is something which which even today happens in rural cultures or in tribal cultures that exist today. We need to understand that the primary motive or objective of religion is to stop breaking the family. Such is the sanctity of the institution of the family. So the Almighty wants that institution to remain intact as far as possible. And if to remain intact in certain situations, if this is something that can stop the wife from showing a certain attitude of rebelliousness, which I'll just explain, then it has been allowed in a very specific context so that the family could still remain intact. So, but if any such choice is exercised in which the family's institution is going to break in any way or cause any other disruption, then this right must never be invoked. Because as I explained through the Quranic verses, that wife beating is not an obligation at all. It's just a choice given in certain circumstances. So if this background is understood, and also we are able to understand that the Quran is for all times, for all cultures, and the choice that it gives, again, as I said, has to be understood in the background of the society that we are living in, that it'll become very easy for us to gauge the fact that that as far as the Quran is concerned, the issue of wife beating is something which is primarily given to save the family from breaking up. If, as I said, there is this chance that you can stop the family from breaking up, and which was the case in a lot of rural cultures, in a lot of tribal cultures. Okay, with this background, now I would now try to explain the Quranic verses, that how specific they are and how in very special circumstances is this right, or can this right be invoked, and how the Almighty wants us to behave, or husbands to behave in this manner. Let me just display the relevant verses before you so that I can explain what the Quran has, or what I have understood from the Quran and from my own teachers. Okay, so before I explain these verses, these are very famous verses, 34th verse of Surah Nisa, let me also first explain that as far as the institution of the family which is envisaged by the Quran is concerned. So the Quran says that as far as marriage is concerned, because it is a union of two individuals, it is a union of two people having separate views, a separate outlook in life, so many other things that might not be in conformity to one another. So it says that once you get married, the institution of the family is a very, very sacred institution, and it should remain intact for the well-being of the child, or the children would be born in future. But in this case, we have the Almighty says that because two people are coming together, so just as a union between two people can always produce difference of opinion at times, but that difference of opinion at times can be settled through discussion and debate, but at times we have a deadlock, so to speak. Two people who have equal opinions, and both are at times very convincing. So what should be done in that case? So the Quran says that the family institution which it envisages is the one in which men are the head of the family. So the words of the Quran are, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa بِمَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ وَبِمَا أَنْفَقُوا مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. It says that men are head, or husbands are the head of the family for two reasons. One of them is that they are generally temperamentally and physiologically more suited to this task. And secondly, they are entrusted with the financial upkeep of the family. They are responsible to financially make the family run. Their wives can, of course, be professionals and they can do their jobs and earn. But if they don't earn, then the husband is liable to support her and the children. So the responsibility of running a family rests on the husband. Whether a wife earns or not, it is her sweet will, and she just can pocket her own earning in her own to her own use and put it to her own use, but she's not at all liable. So these are the two reasons because of which the Almighty says that husbands are regarded to be the heads of the family, and as heads of the family, they have to be as democratic as is possible. So if there is a difference of opinion, they should discuss that difference of opinion with their wives and try to convince. I mean, both should try to cogently argue and debate on the basis of merit, who has the stronger reason, or who is more on merit in a particular decision. But as I said, there are areas in which there is a deadlock. It's difficult to decide. Both could be equally good or equally right, because there are certain decisions in which right and wrong are relative. In such cases, the Almighty says that because the husband is the head of the family, so he is given the casting vote, or he is invested with the position that in case of a deadlock, his decision would prevail, even if it is a wrong decision, because I mean, someone has to. Someone's decision has to prevail. So it says that because of the fact that husbands are the heads of the family, his decision would prevail in case of a deadlock. But that deadlock doesn't mean that immediately, before even discussing an issue with your wife, you start implementing your will. In the first instance, issues have to be discussed and debated, and done so on the basis of merit. If the husband finds the wife to be more convincing, if her opinion is more convincing, he should submit to that opinion, because you see, it's the reasoning or the logical nature of a argument of a particular directive that has to always supersede the other. But as I said, when there is a deadlock, then the Quran says that since the position of the head of the family is invested in the person of the husband, so he is given this prerogative of having the casting vote or the final say. So in other words, just as a state needs a head, or an organization needs a CEO, a family also needs a head, because in the absence of any head, there are decisions, or there are so many things that they'll always remain pending, and they will never be decided, and chaos would result. Now, the other question is that in most cases, what happens is that, as I said, husband and wife, they settle a particular instance through a discussion and debate. But there can be instances in which a wife challenges. I mean, you have to note my words. Not disagrees, not has a different opinion, but he challenges the authority of the husband. She says that, well, I'm not going to accept your authority as the head of the family, and if there is a deadlock, then I'm not going to accept your decision in any way. This is what is called rebellion in the Quran. And the Quran says it is in this situation that when a wife stands up and challenges the authority of the husband, that a certain procedure has to be followed, which I'm just going to explain. But for example, if the wife has a certain opinion when she thinks that she has a right opinion, and she would not like to forego it for certain reasons, or maybe she's done something which could be in any way displeasing to the husband. Maybe she's cooked some food which he doesn't like, or because I'm talking about real life incidents, that these things happen just because husbands, they think that there are things which are happening not according to their pleasure or their own the way they would like to happen, that they start abusing the wife, or even fighting or hitting her. So the Quran in the first place says that as far as the procedure which actually leads to wife beating, which has several steps before that thing actually arrives, that can only and again I'm saying only be invoked when the wife has those rebellious tendencies. It's not a difference of opinion, it's not any case of disobedience. It's a case of challenging the husband and telling her, well, now in future, I'm going to act as the head, or my decision has to prevail in case of a deadlock. Now is the case that the Quran says that if she is now challenging the authority of the head of a family, then she has to be told, well, as far as the heads of the family are concerned, I mean, according to the Quran, they have to be husbands. And just as if you challenge this authority of the head, there are certain penal, I would say, penalties which are imposed on citizens if they violate the authority of the state. So there are certain penalties on the wife as well if she starts to challenge the authority of the husband. It is here that now we need to study the Quranic verses so that it becomes clear that what exactly is the Quran talking about. Remember, what the words used by the Quran are very important. So these words are وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ فَعِزُوهُنَّ وَاهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ فَإِنْ أَطَعْنَكُمْ فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا. As for those from whom you fear rebellion, now the Arabic word uses nushuz. Nushuz means, as I said, rebellion. The wife challenges the authority, the final authority, the authority of being the head of the family. This is what is being discussed here. Now, there are 3 steps which are suggested. As for those women whom you fear rebellion, admonish them. I mean, the first step is izuhunna, which would mean that discuss with them, tell them, advise them, admonish them that, well, you're not doing something correct. You should be looking towards the final decision which has been made by the husband, because he has been given this authority, and you should not challenge this authority, even if the decision is wrong. Now, the second step is wahjuruhunna fil mazaji'i. And if this doesn't happen, if suggesting to her and advising her and admonishing her, she still does not stop her behavior or attitude of rebelliousness, then the next thing is wahjuruhunna fil mazaji'i. Refuse to share their beds, which would mean that any intimacy between the husband and wife should be discontinued. So that this again is something which is expressed as a displeasure. And then it says that even if this is not able to convince them in any way, wadribuhunna, which it means strike them or punish them. But it says فَإِنْ أَطَعْنَاكُمْ فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا. Then if they obey you, take no further action against them. Indeed, God is exalted and mighty. So you see, it is basically to stop the institution of the family, which is of primary importance, from breaking up, that the Almighty lays down a procedure in specific circumstances, only and only when the wife arises in rebellion, not if she disagrees or not if she takes any step which you think is not agreeable to you. But she says that from today onwards, or my own attitude, as I would say, is something which challenges the final authority of the husband, that the Quran wants the family to still remain intact. But there has to be one head, and that head is the husband. But if the wife happens to do so and she says, no, nothing doing, then the Quran says that there are 3 steps. And again, these 3 steps we have to understand. They are dependent on the situation that you are passing through. None of these are mandatory. I mean, at least the third one, which is an extreme step in which you have to hit the wife, is certainly not mandatory at all. It is an option that has been given to you. The first 2, of course, they are also options. You might not choose to exercise them, but the Quran recommends them. That in the first case, if they become rebellious, you talk to them. You say, well, we have to be reasonable to one another. One of us has to have the final say. We will discuss matters. We will argue with each other. But if there is a deadlock, then one person's decision has to prevail. What else can be done? 2 decisions cannot simultaneously be implemented. So advice would be given. Next, and this advice, a time should lapse on this. It should not be that you move on to the second step immediately. If you are suggesting to your wife, if you're trying to convince her, then this proper time should lapse on this. Proper time should pass on this. It should be, let's say, a couple of months or a couple of weeks, and you keep telling her, well, this is not the right attitude. And then when you think, if the husbands think that this is something which is not proving effective, can they take the second step? And that is, they refuse intimacy with their wives, and they don't share the same bed. Again, this is something which is meant to communicate to the wife that she is adopting an attitude which is not conversant with the norms of the family envisaged by the Quran. Again, some time should pass on this. And even when a couple of months or maybe whatever the time a person deems appropriate has passed, and he would see that the wife is still having that same tendency of rebellion. So I keep repeating this word, rebellion. The word used by the Quran is nushuz, rebellion. Nothing less than that can even start this procedure. Nothing less than that. Only when the nushuz is happening, only when that rebellious nature of the wife is picking up, that you are given these options. And the final option is that even if you need to strike her or to hit her, if that could stop her from being rebellious, then yes, you are given that option as well. But as I said, if you realize the fact that these are mere options which are being given to you, they have to be exercised in lieu. They have to be exercised in lieu of the circumstances that you are passing through. And if you think that if you are going to hit the wife and she's going to hit back, it's not wisely, it's not a recommendation at all that you should even go for this step. So these options have to be exercised in a certain background. And as I said, that of course the question does arise today that we are living in these cultures in which this is something, if we even bring it up and even use this as an option, it will break the family. So as I said, that these options are not mandatory, especially the third one is not mandatory at all. It is a choice. People take it as an obligation. No, it's a choice given to you that if this can stop the family from breaking in your own estimation, in your own evaluation, that if taking this step is instrumental in stopping the family from breaking up, then the Almighty says, yes, you can do so. And the Prophet has explained that if this is the situation that arises, then Zarban Ghaira Mubarrih says that then you should not strike your wife in a way that it even leaves a scar or a mark on her skin in any way. It is much like the beating of an affectionate teacher given to a student who has become unruly. So you see, if all these instances are understood, then another thing perhaps that I'd like to explain is that if husbands take undue advantage of this freedom or these options that they are given, their behavior can even be reported and they can be punished for their misbehavior or misconduct. So if they are misusing this authority, then this misuse can be checked by superior authorities, and they can restrain him from even exercising these rights because he is misusing his rights. So if all this background is understood, I can clearly I think there is a lot of wisdom in this Quranic directive. Number one, it is related in situations where this is an effective step to stop the family from breaking. Of course, this decision has to be taken by the husband. Secondly, it's not an obligation at all. It's just a choice, and the choice has to be exercised in the background, in the context that you're living in. Third, as I said, in tribal cultures and in still many cultures which are conservative, this effective step at times stops the family from breaking. So remember, the Quran has a choice to make: either the wife to suffer a little or have the whole family suffer by breaking it up. So the Quran has given this verdict that it's better that if the family is able to maintain itself, it doesn't break up, then if this exercise of authority can stop the family from breaking up, then yes, you are allowed to do so. But as I said, that we have to realize that this can only and only be done when the wife is guilty of nushuz, when the wife is guilty of rebellion, challenging the authority of the husband. It cannot be exercised at anything below that, anything less than that. Today, what we are experiencing as misuse of this right is actually husbands indulging in this without realizing that this is something which is not given to them. This is not an authority that can exercise less than a rebellious attitude by their wife. And secondly, these are the three steps which are options. None of them is an obligation. Of course, you can advise them, you can refuse intimacy with them in a proper sequence, in a proper time frame. And the third is certainly something that you have to only use when you think that it can be effective in stopping the family from breaking. But what if you use the third option and it hastens the breakage of the family institution, then that would be something that you must not do. So it is left to your discretion, but that discretion has to be wisely implemented. So I end my session here, and I'm sure there would be a lot of questions on this, and I would like to answer them if I.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. We do have a lot of questions here, but I'll take questions from the youth first. So one of the question asks, has the Quran stated or implemented any limits on the nature of this beating?
The Quran just says "Wadribuhunna," that you just punish them for this unruly, rebellious behavior, and that is all. And of course, because of the fact that it's a corrective thing, it's not something that you're seeking revenge of. It would automatically mean that because it's a corrective measure, so corrective measures must always be in proper limits. I gave this. I compared this to I can compare this, in fact, to a teacher trying to correct an unruly student. What would she do? I mean, she would resort to punishment, which the child can, of course, bear. He would not become even more rebellious, and he would actually correct his behavior. So, because of the fact that it's a corrective punishment, therefore, it has to be given certain limits. This is what the Quran, this is what we understand from the occasion and the words of the Quran, that it's a corrective measure. It's not a revenge that you are seeking from anyone.
Okay, and so since these steps are not mandatory, does an Islamic country have the option to outlaw any one of them?
So if someone, because of the fact that the first two are not going to cause any problems because they are just personal things that can occur between a husband and wife, it's basically the third one. If in the third area, a government thinks that the husband is doing, he's taking undue advantage, he's misusing his right, then the government can stop the husband from using that right. And in fact, at times that particular right can even be transferred, if needed, to some other elder of the family, or even to the state itself if needed. And if needed, it can even be stopped as far as the husband himself is concerned.
Okay, so why is it said too commonly that a wife can't refuse her husband regarding sexual contact, especially if it's the husband who's acting rebellious?
The sexual contact, as far as that is concerned, that is again a very grave misunderstanding. There is this hadith which we find in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari telling us that if a wife refuses sexual contact, then if you're talking about that hadith, is that so? Are you talking about the hadith?
I'm not sure where they got their source from.
Because there's only one source. So this hadith tells us that if a husband asks his wife to come to bed and have intimacy with him, and she refuses, then she is cursed all night by angels, and she is someone who's looked down upon. This particular narrative has to be understood in its proper context. I have explained it several times in some of my other talks, but I'm just going to briefly touch upon it. First of all, the background here is that husbands and wives, they are the only means through which the sexual pleasure can be satisfied, or the sexual urge can be satisfied. And if this sexual urge is not satisfied amongst them in a proper way, obviously both of them would start looking outside at times from their marital bond, and this should not happen. So the background here is that in normal circumstances, when husbands and wives, there is nothing to stop them from indulging in this act. Or let me put it another way: if, for example, a wife or a husband has a natural situation, he could be tired, or she could be tired, or she would not like to come close to him in any way, this directive does not relate to that situation in any way. It relates to situations in which a wife, she's refusing that intimacy for no reason, for just evading her husband, or trying to just move away from him. It is here that this narrative comes into discussion. Other than that, the Almighty wants this situation, or this whole union, to be something which arises from the consent of both. If either of the partners is not willing to enter into sexual intimacy, if either the husband or the wife, it is something that the other partner should take into consideration. Because you see, being tired from work, being overworked, being not in the proper frame of mind. All these things, they count. And if the other person forces himself on the wife, it is like a punishment to her, and the Almighty doesn't want that to take place. So basically, the narrative relates to to a particular situation in which the husband and wife, or either of them, because in this case we are discussing the wife, she deliberately starts to evade the husband for any reason that she might know, and there are reasons that you can see in normal circumstances, in which, as I said, there could be a number of reasons for the wife not being in the frame of mind. The husband has to take this into account. He cannot force himself on the wife, even in this matter, because this matter relates to the union of two people. Again, the proper consent, the proper mood has to be there for both of them.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. What does Islam say if a husband has the same sort of rebellious behavior? And what does Islam identify as rebellious
Right.
behavior? Can you give some examples?
So you see, first of all, if a husband resorts to this behavior, which is rebellious, then a different procedure has been adopted, and his behavior can be reported to the authorities. Just let me give you this example. You see, taking the example of a country or a state, for example, if the citizens violate the authority or violate a certain law, what would they be done? What would be done with them? Of course, they'll be charged. There would be a case against them. They would be required to go to the court or pay a penalty, and that would be the end of that. But what if the person who's in charge of law, he commits a violation? The citizen cannot charge him back in the same way. What will happen is that he will be reported to the authorities so that they can take action against him. So you see, when you are in a position of authority, and when you're in a position of being submitted to a certain authority, submitting to a certain authority, in both cases, the way that you handle a violation is different. So when a person who is in a situation that he or she is submitting to authority and she has violated the law, then penalty has to be applied from the authority. But when the authority itself violates the law, then it's not that the person who is guilty of that or has become the victim, he can do it on equal terms, but because this will ruin the law itself. So in that case, the person is always reported. So today, if a policeman or a sergeant or any law authority I think that he is taking wrong advantage or he's doing something bad, what will I do? I will go and report him to his superior. So in this case, if the husband has resorted to rebellion, again, there are two things that a wife is left with. She can ask the elders of the family to interfere, or she can even report him to the authorities of the state to punish this person. Or in the third instance, if she thinks that this is going to in any way break up the family, she can just seek divorce from that person. So what I'm trying to explain is that in both cases, action will be taken. Only the nature of action would be different. In the first case, an authority has the prerogative to implement a decision. In the second case, when the authority itself becomes corrupt, then the authority has to be reported to higher ups. It's not that the person who have become victims can take the same step against that person. So there is, in both cases, penalty would be imposed, but there is a difference of procedure in both cases.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Next question asks, considering the negative attitudes towards beating in developed urban societies, is it fair to say that beating is not appropriate in any circumstances in these societies? Or do we look at it as an case-by-case basis, or should it be a combination of both?
I would think that today, in most urban cultures, because you see, we are living in urban cultures, this is the case, I would agree. And I would certainly think that if this step is taken, it will hasten to break the family. Instead of stopping the family from breaking, the next thing would happen is that the wife would pick up her things and just go away. And the thing that you're trying to stop is going to immediately ensue. But as I said today, it's not that all of us are living in urban cultures. Even today, in many third world countries, there are rural cultures, there are tribal cultures. So instead of dealing each with the same sword, I would say, we need to understand that this is an option which the Quran has given in various circumstances, in various cultures. Because of the fact that those cultures are still existing and might exist till the end of time, we cannot curtail that directive, because as I said, wherever it can prove effective from breaking up a family, why not exercise it? Because the breaking up of the family is the not breaking up of the family is the greater good. But today, as I said, wherever we feel that this could be counterproductive, and not only is the case that a wife would certainly go away, but there is an equal chance that she'll just pick up something and throw it at you and start beating you, because today even wives are pretty powerful and muscular. So in that case, I would say that it's basically a decision that has to be taken by the husband in circumstances in which he thinks that it is going to be a corrective measure. But yes, I would say in 99.9% urban cultures, this is going to be counterproductive, and hence it is better not to even think of doing it. So
Okay,
remember,
Dr.
it's an option.
Akram Bhatti, please go ahead.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर।
Walaikum assalam.
सर नया क्वेश्चन है ये निशूज का लफ्ज है इसमें इसकी when people explain issues they say it's not that if wife talks back to you or argues back to you, if she seeks her satisfaction elsewhere outside the marriage bound of marriage, that's only when it's allowed to go to that measure. So इसके बारे में जो आपने अभी पहले बताया वो तो मतलब it's not point of mandatory or not mandatory. They say explanation of or definition of issues is different among different people among different scholars. So what would you say about that?
देखिए, nushuz, as I said, is basically challenging the authority of the husband. And when a wife looks outside the marriage bond and she commits adultery, for example, or has relations with other men, this is the ultimate form of challenging the authority of the husband. So this is one form of nushuz, but not every nushuz is this. I mean, nushuz is a general principle that we need to understand. It is violating the authority of the husband. And if the wife is violating this authority by having relations with other men or one other man, it is precisely nushuz. But it is not that nushuz is just one thing like this. I mean, it has several other shades as well. When you stand up the authority against the authority of the husband, it's not always that you're looking to other men. It is at times that you just want your own say. You just want your own opinion to be implemented, and you keep pressing that. So if you understand this, I think I can give you another clue in this regard, and that is that if we understand what nushuz is, it's not just argument. How many times does this actually happen in the lives of people, in which we already know that women, before they get in and even enter the marriage contract, they know that if they are Islamically married, then it's the husband who is the head of the family. They know already that it's not nothing new to them. So if they are conforming to that, this situation will seldom even arise in the lifetime of an individual.
Mostly, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So because you see, what happens is that people wrongly interpret the meaning of nushuz as just a act of disobedience, maybe, or they think that talking back to the husband is nushuz, or they think that arguing with him is nushuz, or they think that having a difference of opinion is nushuz. This is not nushuz. Nushuz, as I said, is challenging the authority, and this is a persistent behavior. And you have a persistent behavior of letting your husband know that he has no final say in case of a deadlock. So when this happens, the Quran says, it doesn't say when it starts to happen, it says wallati takhafuna, when you fear, when you think that now matters are getting toward this end, that she is continuously being challenging the authority, in which there is a deadlock and there has to be a final opinion, and she's not accepting a final opinion. It is then that you start to realize, well, this family boat cannot move ahead unless there is compliance. So this is how we need to understand this Quranic verse. Nushuz is a very important word, and it cannot be translated to anything less than rebellion, anything less than a rebellious attitude.
What if she is principally she's right? Like mostly what happens is,
right,
जब बच्चों की शादी होने लगती हैं, and that's another major thing that goes between husband and wife. She wants him to, his son to marry there, and he wants her to marry there. And sometimes she's right, but she's insisting on that principally she's right.
Right.
Still, you're going to impose your decision on her?
Yes,
as a man?
that is the case. You see, when you say that she is right, then who is going to decide that she is right or not? You see, as you say, in democracy, at times the person who is overruled is right, but you see, one person has to prevail. At times, the majority is wrong, and the minority is correct. But there has to be a way of deciding things, even if the view of the minority is correct. So, just as in democracy, at times the minority can hold the right view, but in order to settle affairs, some procedure has to be adopted. So, in democracy, also, when there is, as I said, minorities are minority could be correct, but it will have to exceed, and unless and until it becomes a majority in itself, it will continue to be dominated. So, in a very similar way, when we say that a decision has to be implemented, it is regardless of who is right and wrong. One person's decision has to be implemented. It could have been the wife, it could have been the husband. So the Almighty says that forget about who the wife or the husband is, it's the head of the family whose decision shall ultimately prevail. Had the Quran thought that women are more appropriate to be the heads of the family, she would have been given this charge. So I think another correction that we might need to make is we should need to get out of this role of gender, whether it's the husband or the wife. No, the role of, the final prerogative of a final decision rests on the head of the family, whoever that may be. Because in these circumstances, the Quran thinks that the husband is more appropriate to become the head of the family. Therefore, now gender comes into play. Otherwise, it's the prerogative of the head of the family that if there is a deadlock, even if the decision of the husband is wrong, because you see, right and wrong at times become relative. At times, a husband would insist that he is right, and the wife would insist that she is right. Now, there is no third authority to decide who is right. And the Almighty did not think it appropriate that every time there is a deadlock, you go to an arbitrator, because this would just expose the family and create a lot of disturbance. So a simple way out that was given was that in case of a deadlock, even if the husband is wrong, wrong, in whose eyes? In the eyes of the wife as well. In this case, even then she must submit, because it's not a question of submitting to right and wrong. It's just a question of resolving a situation for the moment.
Thank you, sir.
So, since nushuz is not clearly defined, the husbands can deem their wives' decision, for example, of childbearing or meeting their parents, or choosing to have a job or studies, or not cooking fresh food, even as disobedience towards the husbands. What do you say about that?
I think this is the other way around. The shoes is correctly defined. It is incorrectly understood. It's a common Arabic word. If I choose a cognate for it in the English language, it would be rebellion. It would be challenging the authority. So if you don't want a further child, if she is refusing childbearing, or she thinks that the family is enough that they already have, that's her right. Because you see, children are something which are produced by the consent of both. You just cannot implement your own decision either way. It has to be a decision of both individuals. So things which come into play as a result of decisions between two things have to be taken from both sides. So this would be a wrong implementation of nushuz. Nushuz means that, let me give you a simple example. For example, a child when he or she starts to grow up, now a wife wants to send her child to a particular school, and the husband says, "No, well, the school is not appropriate, and here's a different school that I would like to send my child." And they discuss the matter, and there are merits and demerits, and discussions take place, and ultimately, after a long session with each other, so many things, there is a deadlock that the husband and the wife, they still differ, and the wife feels very strongly that the child should go to one school, and the husband feels equally strongly. Because you see, in such cases, after much discussion and debate, one of the partners generally concedes. It does happen. But there could be a case when both feel so strongly, ideologically or due to any other reason, that the child must not go there and he should go there. Now what should be done? Because now both feel so strongly that there is, when we say a deadlock, it means a real deadlock. It means that nothing can be now I mean, nothing can be instrumental in convincing either of them. They have tried their best and they still are very strong towards their own decisions. So in such cases, what should be done? Because I mean, it's not the fault of the child. So here is an example in which ultimately the wife must concede, although she might be even correct.
Thank you,
Because
Dr.
you see, because you see, what happens is that in such situations, there is a subtle or a thin line between insisting and between having a deadlock. So when there is a deadlock, then there has to be some casting vote, because you see, in the first place, there is no third authority. There is not an arbitrator which is appointed in the family, or there is not an odd number in the family so that there could be a majority of one side. There is an even number. So in an even number, we have been left with no choice but this one particular package in which the head of the family's decision has to prevail.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. We still have a bunch of questions on this topic, but we'll run short on time.
So I think I would suggest that I will defer the third topic to my next session because of the fact that this is an important topic. I think let's take questions and more questions as well, and I'll take up the third topic in my next session.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saleem. So the next question asks, is there any hadith in which the Prophet mentioned that if you have to beat your wife, you should beat them in such a way that it leaves no marks on the body?
Yes, there is a hadith, and that is a very famous hadith. It says that if this is the case, if this situation arises, then the words are zarban ghaira mubarrihin, which means that the strike should be such that it doesn't leave a mark on the place that you hit the wife. It has to be, which means that it should be a light beating. It should be something which like maybe like a slap or something like that, which just meant to caution and prod, to make that person realize that what are you doing?
Right. If the country's constitution declares hitting of wives as an offensive crime, would it still be allowed, or would it become not allowed?
I'm sorry, I couldn't get the question.
If a country's constitution declares that you're not allowed to beat your wife, in that case, it would be a crime then.
In that case, then they have to suggest an alternative. I mean, what should happen? I mean, if the wife is still persistent in her behavior, would the country advise that, okay, in that case, we'll just break up the family? As I said, because of the fact that this is a form of a punishment, an alternative can be appointed, someone amongst the elders of the family or even a state authority, that can, if that measure can be appropriate in stopping the family from from ending into this situation, that can be done. But as I said, this is something which has to be debated and discussed first in the parliament, that husbands are misusing their rights in most cases. This is one situation. And another situation is that, I mean, cases come to your notice in which a husband has misused his authority. So there is a general breakout of such thing, and people are doing this generally, and there could be specific cases. So I think we need to discuss both of them separately. If there is a general misuse, yes, a law can be made. If there is a specific case of misuse, then that can be decided on a case-to-case basis. And that case-to-case basis, whoever the arbitrator is, he can be told that this is how families are functioning and this is how this is being misused, and he can give his verdict, and at times he can even stop the husband from exercising this right, because you see, that right is actually being instrumental in breaking the family. So whenever that exercise of right is going to this extent of breaking up the families, then a husband can be restrained from exercising that right.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. So how can we guarantee that people in tribal areas will be able to understand the meaning of nushuz if, for example, because of lack of education, the meaning of nushuz gets in their way, even though it's clearly defined? How can we reassure that the Quran's message has been correctly, or has reached the people in those areas most correctly?
Well, this is not the case just with nushuz. This is the case with so many other things in the Quran. And I would say that in that particular area, or in that particular concern, can be addressed when we have a campaign of Quranic literacy being launched, so that people in all walks of life, in every strata of the society, living whether in urban areas or in rural areas, they have access to this and they are educated. So this is not just with nushuz, it could be with any other directive of the Quran which people just misinterpret. So this has got more to do with the spread of Quranic education, as I say, Quranic literacy. Mothers have to be educated through Quranic literacy, who are the first seat of learning. So instead of concentrating just on nushuz, I think the effort should be that the message of the Quran should be spread in a way that it should be the responsibility of the local government or the provincial government and ultimately the federal government, that they take these steps, that the Quran penetrates and goes far and wide, so that the general awareness and understanding regarding the Quran is not compromised.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. So the question previously asked about wife beating becoming a crime is because about Muslims living in non-Muslim countries, hitting is considered domestic violence.
Right.
So choosing the option to hit your wife may end you up in the jail.
Absolutely. So they should not use this option. You see, when they are living in a non-Muslim country in which this right has been annulled or has been taken away from the husband, and it actually amounts to domestic violence, then that would mean that they simply cannot exercise this option, and they should not, because they should be law-abiding citizens, and in this case, it's a law. And remember, when there is a law which stops you from doing which is mandatory for you, only then it should be a point of concern. For example, if there's a law in which you are told that, well, you cannot pray, and I doubt that there can ever be such a law, it is then that we should have a point, some concern. But when there is a law in which something which is already non-mandatory in nature, already something which is just an advice, if that is stopped, then it doesn't mean that we are in any way violating our own Sharia.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. So in cases where a wife is more educated, has more intellect, earns more than the husband, and can support the whole family, the head of the husband would still be, the head of the family, would that still be the husband?
Yes, because you see, the Quran just doesn't say that it's just the financial part which makes the husband the head. The Quran has actually stated two things. So one of them is bima faddalallahu ba'dahum ala ba'd, and the second one is wabima anfaqu min amwalihim. That one is that they are generally temperamentally, mentally more suited for this purpose. They are generally more inclined. It's like saying that the love and affection which a mother generally has for the child, it outshines the natural love and affection which a father may have. So it's such a natural thing for a mother to be more caring for the child than the husband. In a very similar way, it is said that being the head of the family, it comes naturally to the husband, just as becoming a mother to become a caring mother to a child comes more naturally to a mother. So in this case, the Quran says that this is which the husband's. The reason that the husband is given this status is that he is temperamentally and mentally more suited for this job, and secondly, that he earns. So these are two conditions that have to be met at the same time. So if a wife is just earning, it still doesn't make her eligible for that position, because the other thing which the Quran has just stated would stand unfulfilled.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Riaz, you can go ahead.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab.
Salam.
I would like to hear your thoughts about this. Your thoughts about this opinion that this verse number 34 has nothing to do with the free men and women, like a household that consists of a free man and a free woman. It actually pertains to slave women and slave wife. So the argument goes like this: that for free men and women, that household, the divorce and other commandments have been given in detail in Surah Al-Baqarah, and then in Surah Nisa. After talking about orphans, inheritance, and widows, Allah is talking about fahisha. And in that regard, Allah said, don't marry with your stepmothers, as well as Allah says that these slave women, marry with them, and then slave women and slave men, why don't you guys just make their households? This is something like, so here we have a new household, which we know that slave women during those days, they did not have really good when it comes to fahisha, whether they wanted this or they were forced to. But now this new household, in order to create this new household, Allah says, fankihu bi idni ahlihinna, ask their guardians before you arrange their marriage. Therefore, in the next verse number 35, Allah says, when there's a problem, then fab'athu hakman min ahlihi wa hakman min ahliha. So because again, guardians are involved, not only to for their marriage, if there's a problem, again involve their guardian. So therefore, this ar-rijalun qawwamun, these people, which means this new household that we just created, there is a slave woman. Now she is in this marriage contract, so she needs to stop this nushuz, this fahisha, and become like qanitatun, hafizatun, become one of those ladies. And if she rebels, then this pertains to these people, ar-rijaluna, these people, not generally like everybody in the town. So your thoughts about that? Thanks.
Well, I would say this has made an absolute mockery of the coherence found in the Quran. The verse that you have just referred to, "Fankihunna bi izni ahlihinna," of course, refers to the background in which marriage between slave women and free men had been discussed. But right after that, we have verses which says, for example, "La tatamannaw ma faddalallahu bihi ba'dakum ala ba'd," that there are certain institutions in which the Almighty has given one person more, he or she being more suitable for that particular job. So just before 434, we have 432 and 433, verses 32 and 33, explaining the fact that even before the subject of marriage is brought up, women and men are being advised. Just pick up the Quran and see, it says, "La tatamannaw ma faddalallahu bihi ba'dakum ala ba'd, lirrijali nasibum mimma iktasabu wa linnisa'i nasibum mimma iktasabna," which means that men and women, if they are given certain natural traits which make them superior in one form or the other, you should not desire those traits because they are naturally being given to you. So for men there's a share fixed for them, for which they can earn, and for women, of course, there is a fixed share which they can earn. And the Quran says that the area in which that you need to desire and outdo one another is the area of piety. So you see, the context of this Quranic verse is that that is being built up is that husbands are to be given this authority, but before that subject is brought up, we are told that there are certain natural inclinations which are found in people for which they are given certain responsibilities. So don't desire them. The real desire that you should have should be to outdo one another in affairs which are not naturally given and which can be actually earned, and that is piety. So if God has given someone more ability than you, and that is a God-gifted ability, then instead of being desirous of that ability from someone other, what you should do is that you should take lead in piety, because doing good works doesn't require any natural talent. That natural talent is something which is always God gifted. So once this is settled, it is now said, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa," that men as husbands have been given this authority of being heads of the family by the Almighty. And this is because bima faddalallahu ba'dahum ala ba'd, because God have made them more suitable for this job. Just as the previous verses said, "La tatamannaw ma faddalallahu bi ba'dakum ala ba'd," don't desire from the other gender for which that gender is more appropriate. So you see, the build-up was always there. And secondly, you have to realize bi'izni ahlihinna and hakam min ahlihi and hakam min ahliha are the two entirely different things. Hakam is not the ahl. And if fankihuhunna bi'izni ahlihinna, which means that you have to marry them through the consent of their masters. The word ahl is used for that. But the word ahl is not used in the other verse, which follows this 434. It says hakamam min ahlihi, which means an arbitrator, someone who can arbitrate between the two, not the people not the person who is their master. So I think it's just a case of following the Quran, the words of the Quran in the proper way. And again, you'll find that there are a number of things which do not collocate between in the verses themselves. For example, when it says فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ بِمَا حَفِظَ اللَّهُ, how would that even collocate with slave women? in the first place. Because when you see that men are invested with this authority is because they earn for their women or their wives, and at the same time they are more suitable for this position. And if this is the case, then the word fasalihatu qanitatun, which immediately follow this, they would relate to wives. Fasalihat, there is an alif lam on that, and there is a fa on that, which is called the fa of taqib. It has to relate to the previous verse. It cannot go to the slave women and men, which are mentioned 3 verses earlier. So I think that this is something of a, in my humble opinion, a very incorrect understanding. These verses specifically relate to the husband and wife relationship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Next question is from Abdul Rahman. Please go ahead.
Sir, as you have the very immense eye in the topic of history of Quran, so I have heard a lot about the Sana's manuscript. So, is there any difference in the in today's Quran and the Sana's manuscript?
Yes, there is. But the question is that this doesn't make any case against the Quran in any way, because I have explained in my research, written it down as well and spoken in various forums, on various forums as well, that because of the fact that the variant readings were accepted earlier on by scholars, so therefore there are and there should be manuscripts that when you discover them, you'll find them on a different reading. I mean, this is but natural, because once you accept the variation in the Quran, once you think that this is something which is acceptable, and because of the fact that this happened very earlier on in the earliest times, so therefore you're bound to find those such musahif which have a different reading. As I said, I explained it elsewhere by writing down the fact that one of the reasons for these variations is the fact that when the Quran was being revealed, there were certain readings which did not find their mention in the final reading, which is the Arzai Aqira, and then there were certain inflections which had been changed, so there could be always remnants of that the first reading, and there could always be distortions as well, because people were not very proficient in writing and they could have made those errors. So I have given a whole list of things which could have caused those variant readings, but that is another case. But more appropriate or more point of concern is the fact that because of the fact that these variant readings came to be accepted by earliest authorities, so we're bound to find masahif or codices which have these different readings. And besides the Sana manuscript, we have several other manuscripts as well which have different readings, and this should not be a cause of concern in any way.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you.
So a question asks, what if a husband doesn't want a baby and his wife really wants one? Is there any hadith regarding this matter?
I mean, because of the fact that a husband and wife have to be, the consent of both must take place, because the fact that this is a process in which both of them are involved. So if either of them is unwilling, I think then the person who is unwilling, his or her view has to be taken into account, because to produce something, the consent of both of them has to be there. And if the wife wants, it could be the other way around as well. The husband wants the child and the wife does not want it. The wife wants a child and the husband does not want it. But because of the fact that this is a matter in which the consent of both is required, so unless the consent of both of them is there, the other person should honor the lack of interest, or maybe or a different decision which the other partner has taken. So it basically boils down to the fact that it has to be a decision jointly made, and if either of the partners is not, for different reasons, not agreeing to it, then the other partner should honor this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, in Catholicism, there is no divorce system. There's only separation system. So if anybody wants to remarry again, they have to apply for an annulment, which is very expensive and also a very difficult process. So if a wife now wants to marry again, but she isn't able to apply for annulment, like she wants to convert to Islam, marry a Muslim man, what can she do, and what's Islam's stance on it? Because her previous husband's consent is also needed. whom she's separated from.
And is she not able to have that consent from the previous husband?
I guess, yeah, that wasn't defined in the question.
Because you see, if they are not legally separated, which would mean that they are not legally divorced, then this would end up then she being married to two men at the same time, even though one of them is totally dormant. So I think this is a case that has to be taken up in a particular forum on which this ruling has to be discussed. That if a Muslim, I mean, if a lady wants to convert and she does not want to remain in wedlock, then she should be provided some relief. And if the annulment causes a lot of financial stress or burden, then at least she should be helped in these circumstances. So I would still ask her to abide by the law, because if she doesn't do that, then ultimately it would end up being in the situation that she's married to two individuals. So perhaps a better way out would be that if the community comes forth and helps that lady by providing some financial assistance, so that annulment, which is very expensive, people can share in that. The future husband, of course, he could, if he's in a position, he could do that. And I think a lot of Muslim organizations, they should be, an appeal should be made to them that this conversion is just being, I mean, stalled just because of this money not being there or being available. So I think until that law is passed, one of the ways out would be to appeal to these organizations and maybe even try to raise some funds publicly for this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question says that in your book about misconceptions about women, there was an article regarding facial hair in which you mentioned the verse, "Stay on the nature that the God created by Allah Almighty, on which He created man. It is not appropriate to change the creation of Allah Almighty." But then, in your lecture about the tattoo, you said that this verse referred to the nature of being born not as a polytheist. So,
Yes.
how can the same verse be interpreted in two different ways?
No, I actually, when I stated that, I mean, that I wrote an article, I was stating the opinion found in that hadith, which is stated there. And in this particular lecture, which I was just talking about tattoos, I was telling them that the context of this Quranic verse is that "La tabdila li khalqillah," which is, I think, a verse of Surah Rum. And if the context is taken into consideration, it means that it relates to monotheism. That when you opt for polytheism, you are changing the nature on which a human being has been designed by the Almighty. The Almighty has designed the nature of a human being to be a monotheist. He's a natural monotheist. But when you indulge in polytheism, you are changing that natural design, that natural inclination which the Almighty has in Himself. And if I have stated that in one of my books, I need to see that once again, because if that is the case, then I would revise that thought.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all the questions. I don't know if the participant who asked the last question would like to unmute and ask any clarification questions, because it was a really long question that they sent me.
Okay.
But if that's not the case, then
okay. So I'll that's fine.
Sorry,
But I'll look up that part in which the question has been raised. And if that question could be sent to me personally, I could answer that question personally as well and see where did I mean, I might have revised my opinion. So I'll look it up and then I can only answer.
I can send you the question personally. And we just got another question, so I'm sorry.
Okay, please go ahead.
So the question asks, in Pakistan, a medical procedure for family planning, which is called tubal ligation, requires the husband's consent even if there is a medical emergency.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about this?
See.
So, sorry, they continued. So in some cases, if husbands are not available, fathers or even sons are asked to give the consent.
First of all, you see, if you are living in a country which has a particular law, even if you not agree to it, you have to follow the law. I mean, the laws cannot be violated. Laws are enacted, and as responsible citizens, you have to follow that. Now, the other question is whether the law is in itself correct or not. So, if the law is that if a wife doesn't want more children, and the consent of the husband is essential for that, I think that this is something which must be debated upon, because I would personally, I have this opinion that if the wife doesn't want children and she wants to go for a tubular ligation in which she no longer has the ability to bear children, and she wants to stop that, because and she's one person who's involved in that act. So personally, my vote would be for her convenience, and I would say that yes, if one of the partners would not like the children, then it should be honored, because children are produced by the consent of both, and one of them is unwilling, and if in any way that one partner, it could be the wife or the husband, is willing to make sure, like in the case of ligation, that children don't happen, then I think that should not be dependent on the will of the husband. I mean, the consent of the husband should not be made essential.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. That answers the question. That was it for all the questions.
Okay, inshallah, we'll see each other in our next session and hope to continue with this discussion. And we might be ending our series in the next session. I'll just have to look up some of the topics that are remaining. And until next week, so it is Khuda Hafiz, and please take care.